Hey, I'm Brother Giovanni of Pien del Carpine, a Franciscan envoy who rode to the Mongol court in 1245. The air in a felt tent smells like sour mare's milk and smoke. I was old when I went, but my eyes were clear. I saw things I could not write for years. One secret still sits in my travel pouch, folded next to a letter for the Pope. Stay with me, I'll show you what the chronicles skip. A drum thudded outside Batis camp on the Volga the night we entered, and the guards made us pass between two fires. They said it burned off bad intentions. Inside, a boy poured drink into a wooden bowl and pushed it into my hands. I drank and watched the women move through the crowd like the wind through tall grass, quiet and everywhere. I had come to ask about war. I learned about households instead. A rule that sounds protective hides a harsher truth. At Karakorum months later, I stood in a larger tent with painted poles, listening to a steward rattle through names as carts arrived. Wives had their own camps, ordos, with people, herds, and guards. Each camp answered to a principal wife. Borte was the first. Others were Yasujin, Yasue, and Kolon. Their tents managed stores, gifts, and captives. You see an empire when you walk its kitchens. A kitchen list can read like a battlefield map. Exactly a year earlier, in Lyon, the Pope told me, "Go, learn their plans, and return alive." I thought I would count lances. Instead, I counted marriages. On the Steppe, a wife could be a treaty, a dowry, or a debt paid. Friar William of Rubruck, who came after me, noted that among them, a man buys a wife, bride price, gifts, obligations, and a married woman marks the union by shaving the front of her head the next day. That line sounds simple. It is not simple when the woman came from a defeated tribe. Not every husband was chosen, many were assigned. The Mongols told me stories about Genghis Khan before the titles and the empire. His mother Ho-Ilan was abducted in a raid. She survived and raised Temujin, the man we call Genghis. After Temujin married Borte, enemies seized her too. He fought, recovered her, and soon their first son was born. These episodes mattered to them. They said the world was hard and people were prizes in war. Those same sources praise Borte's rank and authority in camp. Nothing I heard erased the violence in those beginnings. The origin stories already carry the wound. Back to Karakorum. Women sat near the felt wall while officials called out deliveries, grain, silk, captives. I watched a cart halt. Two girls climbed down slowly. A woman from a conquered group, now attached to an Ordo, told me under her breath that some would become servants and some concubines. She did not cry. She had learned to wait for orders. Scholars today write that from the first campaigns, warriors brought back women as slaves and concubines. The markets from the Black Sea to China swelled with such captives. We met merchant caravans that proved the point without words. One ledger entry says more than 10 speeches. Exactly 3 months later, in the Orkhon Valley, I heard something that sounded like protection. By law, they told me, adultery meets the death penalty. It matched the severity we saw on other crimes. My interpreter squeezed my sleeve. He knew I would ask whether this shielded the weak. It did, sometimes, inside the Mongol community, especially when a man touched another man's wife without sanction. But the same tents that punished adultery also sorted female captives after battle. Law kept order at home. War supplied the households. That is the harder truth. Order at home does not erase conquest outside. You want names and dates. So do I. Genghis favored Borte and raised other principal wives to run Ordos. He married highborn women taken after victories, Yasujin and Yasue among them, and reallocated women by command when politics required it. Even divorce and reassignment could be in order, as with Ibaka, whom sources say he dismissed and married to a loyal commander while letting her keep the title Khatan. In this world, marriage was a rank, a duty post, not only a private bond. A wedding could feel like a reassignment letter. That same evening, a Kipchak woman who worked near the horse lines asked why I watched the carts. I told her I was counting. She laughed once and said, "Count the tents, not the people. The people move." She explained how a principal wife's camp might shelter junior wives, concubines, children, and vassals' families. She said a girl's fate depended on distance to a pole of power near the Khan's tent. Rules were strict. In far columns, commanders did as they liked. She was not bitter, she was exact. Her words turned my notes from names to patterns. Modern historians point out the same structure. Elite women commanded large establishments, while conquered women were folded into those establishments as labor and, too often, as coerced partners. The closer the pull, the harder the rule. At dawn the next day, as we prepared to ride on to Monk's court, I tested a rumor that the Khan's men forbade rape and kidnapping in the law because the founder knew the damage those crimes had done to his own mother and wife. Guards nodded. An elder said yes, then added, "When soldiers break the rule, they die." I wrote it down. But again, the contrast stayed. Harsh sentences existed on paper and were enforced within the ranks, yet captives still arrived in chains, and the empire's labor system depended on them. Law and practice sat in the same saddle. Two truths rode side by side, never touching. Back to the road. We crossed burned places where surrender had failed. In those ashes, you do not need lectures about sexual practices. The camp routines tell the story. Marriage tied houses to houses. Concubinage filled the spaces between. Slave markets connected the frontiers to the court. Inside the tents, the rules were strict. Outside the tents, the rules were the riders. That is what I saw, and what I heard, and what I wrote for men who wanted only to know if the Mongols would attack. They did attack. They also built a social order that fed on victory. One last thing before we move on. You've heard the boast that half the world descends from the conqueror. We will test that later. For now, remember that legends about numbers can hide the system that produced them. Keep your eye on the tents. The famous number is not the real story. Back to Monk's audience tent. He was a prince then, son of Talyui, stern and careful. He mattered because his Ordo managed grain, captives, and gifts while envoys waited for orders from higher thrones. Oil lamps smoked. Felt walls held the heat. A scribe tapped a brush against a narrow board. They made us swear before they read numbers. A steward named Genghis stood near the entrance. He served princes as an administrator and kept the rosters. He mattered that morning because he held the ledger on his arm and watched our faces while it opened. My interpreter, Basil, stood at my elbow. He was a Rus cleric who knew Turkic well enough to keep me from stepping on law. He mattered because one wrong word could end the embassy. They set a wooden bowl before us. We had to drink and bow to the host and to the laws, the Yassa. Then the steward asked us to speak truth, not rumor. I spoke the formula. I kept my tone flat. The scribe began to read. He listed carts, bolts of silk, buckets of silver, sheep and people, girls and boys, counted by age and by origin. Some lines ended with the name of a woman who would take charge of them in an Ordo. The scribe did not pause. He read the list the same way he read grain. The room stayed warm while my hands went cold. Exactly a year earlier, in Lyon, the Pope warned me to keep my vows and my judgment. He told me to listen, not to flatter. He told me to record what I could prove. I carried that order across the steppe like a stone. Back to Monk's tent. The scribe finished a page and raised his brush. The steward asked me if the counts matched what I had heard in Battis camp. I said I could confirm the carts and the herds. I said nothing about the girls. Silence can be heard. The steward heard it. One silence drew a sharper line than words. A woman entered with an iron key on a cord. Her name was Alaka. She served the Ordo of a principal wife. She mattered because she directed stores and servants and could decide where captives slept. She set down a sealed pouch. The steward broke the wax and read a short order. 2 girls to spinning, 1 to the dye pit, 1 to a junior wife's tent, 1 held for the prince's judgment. I kept my eyes on the floor. You learn more by listening to how a room breathes. Basil leaned close and whispered the rule as he knew it. Inside the polity, adultery brought death. Kidnapping from allied tents brought death. Touch without sanction brought death. Outside the polity, after conquest, the commander assigned women. If a woman bore a son, her rank rose. If she did not, she stayed a concubine or a servant. I asked aloud, as an envoy, whether a captive could refuse. The steward said refusal delayed order and exposed her to disorder. He said the law aimed at order. Their answer used one word again and again. That same evening, we witnessed an oath among officers. A skin of kumis went around once, twice. Each man swore to guard the prince's household and not to take with hand or eye what belonged to a brother in the army. The wording struck me. It guarded wives and stores inside. It did not speak about captives who had just been counted. Later, Alaka explained why. She said the Ordo stood between soldiers and chaos. She said the Ordo received, sorted, and raised workers and children. She did not soften the edges. Exactly 3 months later, word came that we would move west, then turn back east to reach the higher court. On the road, I spoke with 2 merchants who traded cloth for people. Their cart rattled and smelled of dye. They said the quickest buyers stood near river crossings and winter camps. They named prices for girls with weaving skill. They said princes sent lists ahead so that households had their right hands before spring. Their voices stayed steady. I wrote the numbers down. Back to the prince's tent in my telling, because that first audience set the pattern. A pattern hides better than a single act. At dawn the next day, the steward called again. He asked for a prayer. I gave it and then asked my own question. I asked him how right flowed from wrong if a house began with capture. He did not shrug. He said the founder knew pain. He said the founder punished men who harmed allies' women. He said the founder also made marriage a tool of rule. He pointed to the ledger. He said the ledger kept enemies from tearing loose. He said the oath kept brothers from tearing each other. He saw no conflict in that pair. I asked to see the girl marked for the prince's judgment. He refused. Alaka spoke instead. She said the prince would decide her placement after a fast and a consultation. She said the prince did not rush such choices because placements changed fates and lines of descent. She said a wrong choice brought fights 20 years later. Her words were clean and direct. I wrote them down and then I stopped writing for a moment. I thought of a passage from this secret history that named new wives after victories. I shut my book. I kept my face still. A closed book can hold a loud thought. Exactly a year earlier, I had promised to report without heat. I still tried. But here was the crossing of ledger and oath. They swore to protect what the ledger produced. They treated that protection as justice. I understood the structure. I did not accept it. I asked one last question before they dismissed us. I asked if the women ever became free. Alaka answered again. She said freedom came by rank, by bearing sons, by gifts from rulers, or by age. She said some were released to marry allied men to seal new bonds. She did not claim many. Back to the audience tent. Final minutes. Monk listened while the steward summarized my questions. The prince asked me one in return. He asked whether our lords protected widows and daughters in war. I said we tried. He nodded once. He told the steward to send us meat, hay, and a guide. He told Alaka to place the new girls by evening. He did not raise his voice. The scribe closed the ledger with 2 ties of cord. The day moved on. They ended the talk. Nothing ended outside. On the road out, the Kipchak woman from the horse lines caught my stirrup and spoke fast. She had a name, Tokol. She mattered because she gave me a detail I had not heard in the tent. She said a captured woman could name a kin brother as guardian if she found him in the camp. It did not always work, but the claim sometimes moved her to safer work. She begged me to write that down. I did. I sealed her words in a small note and slid it into my pouch with the letter to the Pope. That note will not stay sealed forever. We rode on. The winter sky sat low. Herds moved past like slow water. The guide set a pace that broke older men. Basil kept me talking so I would not think too much. I watched for the next court, the higher court, and the chance to ask about laws again. You asked for horror. You see it here in rules that look clean and cut lives into columns. You see it in how quickly a number becomes a person again when the cart stops and steps down. Next, I will take you to the winter court, where a marriage gift arrived with a letter, and one woman asked me to choose between truth and safety. Back to the winter court. The snow packed hard under hooves. Smoke from iron stoves hung low. Voices carried clean in the cold. They set us near the edge of the main camp. close enough to hear the signal drum, far enough to keep from blocking carts. Cold air makes every word sound sharper. A marriage gift arrived before noon. 5 carts. 1 fluttering pennant. A clerk from the east rode beside them. He mattered because he carried a letter from a vassal prince and the list of gifts that proved loyalty. The list named furs, silk, 2 fine horses, and 1 marriageable girl of good family, sent to join a junior wife's tent. The clerk bowed low and presented the letter to a steward of the regent's household. The steward's name was Kara. He mattered because he chose which Ordo received which gift. A letter can weigh more than a cart. Exactly a year earlier, in Lion, I promised to observe and not interfere. I held to that line as if it were a rail. Back to the winter court. Kara snapped the seal and read aloud. The letter wished the health of the regent and asked for mercy and taxes. It praised the laws. It mentioned the girl in 1 sentence, by age and clan, not by name. The clerk did not look at her. He looked at the steward's face for signs of favor. The girl stepped down from the cart. She walked without a stumble. She wore a blue-lined coat. She kept her eyes low. Alaka, the woman with the iron key, came from the Ordo to inspect her. Alaka mattered again because she managed assignments. She pressed the girl's wrist, turned her hand, and asked 2 questions about spinning and counting. The girl answered each in 1 word. A test can pass in 3 heartbeats. Basil, my interpreter, murmured a line about practice. He said this was common. Gifts could be people. Placement could change their whole life. I asked his name for the record. He said to write none. He said we might meet her again under another tent. He was right, but not yet. That same evening, the women of several Ordos gathered to sort the contents of the carts. I stood with Kata and listened. The first discussion ran on horses and harness. The second turned to the girl. Alaka said the junior wife's tent was full. Another woman, Dolan, served a different principal wife. She asked for the girl on the grounds of need. She said her tent lacked a steady hand in the dye shed. Kata nodded. He told them to mark the girl for Dolan's Ordo. The clerk exhaled. His duty now looked lighter. 1 nod decides a stranger's next decade. Exactly 3 months later, on the road toward the higher court, we heard gossip that the regent weighed new matches for allies after the next council. Back to the winter court in my telling, because 1 more thing happened that night. A guard led me behind a felt screen. The girl from the cart waited there. She mattered now because she spoke to me directly. She said her name was Urk. She said she had been promised to a cousin before the war. She said her father had sent her to save the clan tax. She did not cry. She asked me for 1 thing. She asked me to write her name in my report so that someone in the West would know she had existed. Then she asked me to do the opposite. She asked me not to write about how the gift lists worked because a steward had warned that a complaint from a foreign envoy would fall on the girl, not the steward. Truth or safety, she asked. Choose. I stood between ink and a human voice. I told her I had no power here. She said I had the power to shape words that would travel. She said words could mark a practice as shameful. She said they could also mark a person as disobedient. She asked me to keep her off the page and help her reach a safer tent. She asked for a small lie. She did not call it that. She called it a favor. At dawn the next day, Alaka came to my fire with the ledger clerk. They asked a question in turn. Had I spoken with the girl? I told them yes. They asked if she begged me to intervene. I said she had asked only for prayers. Alaka watched my mouth as I spoke. She knew I had more to say. She sent the clerk away and kept me there. The tent felt warm. My back felt cold. Alaka told me the Ordo could move Urk to the dye shed under Dolan or to the horse lines where Tokal worked. The dye shed stayed indoors. The horse lines cut hands and froze feet. She said she would choose the dye shed if no one complained. Then she told me the price. She said I would write about oaths, courts, travel, and punishments. I would not write the gift line in a way that made the regent look weak or cruel. Order must not look hungry, she said. She did not raise her voice. A bargain can sound like a blessing. Exactly a year earlier, in Lion, I had sworn to our order to tell the truth. I held that oath with both hands. Here, a different oath pressed against it. I asked Alaka what would happen if I refused. She said nothing at first. Then she said Urk would still work somewhere. She said trouble would find the girl faster than it would find the steward. She said I should count the living more than I counted phrases. I asked to see Tokal, the Kipchak woman from the horse lines. She came at once. She listened without flinching. She said the dye shed would be better for Urk. She said I should keep my eyes on the next court if I wanted to carry my report home. She said she had seen men with clear consciences die for nothing. She did not ask me to be brave. She asked me to be useful. Usefulness can feel like surrender. That same evening, the clerk returned with a fresh strip of paper. He dictated a bland line for my notes. The regent's households receive gifts according to need. Assignments follow skill. He smiled as he spoke. He thought he had taught me how to write. In that moment, I reached into my pouch and touched the small note I kept there. I had written Tokal's detail about guardianship claims on it and a list of names. I added one more, Urk. Then I made my choice. I told Alaka I would accept her terms. I would write the practice in cool words. I would not write the parts that would bring a reckoning on a girl who had no shield. In return, I wanted two things written in their ledger. First, Urk to Dolan's dye shed with no transfer for 1 year. Second, Tokal to name Urk as King Guardian for the same period. Alaka considered. She agreed. She marked the ledger and pressed the wax. The seal clicked like a door closing. Here is the secret, the one folded next to the letter for the Pope. I bartered silence for placements. I wrote a report that did not show the winter carts as they were shown to me. I told the truth about laws and oaths. I hid how a gift could be a girl with a line through her future. I did it to keep 2 women safer for a year. I did it to keep my embassy alive long enough to carry warnings about war. It felt inevitable because the ledger ran the camp, and the ledger could crush anyone who challenged it from inside. Back to the winter court after that admission. Kata signed off on the assignments. Dolan's people led Urk away. Tokal returned to the horse lines with a half smile that did not reach her eyes. Basil looked at me and then looked away. He knew I had paid in words. He did not judge me. He knew we still needed to reach the higher court. One secret solved, another waits up the road. We broke camp at first light. The snow squeaked under the sled runners. The guide pointed east. I tucked the small note deeper in my pouch. I had closed one path for the truth and opened another. I began to plan how to set down what I had done, not in the main report, but in a line that another set of hands could carry when I could not. The next court would test that plan. A new set of eyes would read my face and decide whether I left Karakorum alive. Next, I will take you to the Great Court for the enthronement season, where the law spoke loudly and a single question cut the camp to silence. Back to the road east. The guide pressed us hard. Hoofbeats drummed. Frost blew from the horses' mouths. When the hills opened, the great camp spread and rose. Karakorum stood beyond, with carpenters hauling beams and cooks boiling cauldrons before dawn. We had reached the enthronement season. A city hums when a throne waits. I will name the rulers you need to know. Torajin Khatan, widow of the last great Khan, held power as regent. She mattered because every envoy passed through her people first. Her son Gayuk stood next in line. He mattered because the title would soon sit on his belt, and every order in the camp already bent toward him. Their tents raised taller poles. Their guards wore heavier coats. Their stewards spoke in the flat tone of men used to obedience. 2 names turned every door. Exactly a year earlier, in Lyon, the Pope handed me a letter to the Great Khan and told me to carry it to the one whom the people recognized. Back to Karakorum. Our guide led us through an alley of flags. We could smell pine smoke, horses, and boiled meat. A man with a bronze staff counted us in. Basil kept our papers close. Kata, the steward I knew from the winter court, met us at the court. He mattered because he could bring us inside or leave us out in the wind. He lifted the cord. We passed. They led us to the Envoys' quarter. Koreans, Persians, Russ, and people from lands I could not place stood around small fires. Drums sounded at fixed hours. You could feel the ground tremble. Alaka appeared with 2 attendants, iron key on her cord, face set. She told me we would have one audience soon after the proclamation of laws. She warned me to keep my questions short. She did not smile. I said I would do so. The law would speak before we could. At dawn the next day, the proclamation began. Officials stood in a line. One read the rules on theft, ambassador safety, and discipline. Next came the words on households, respect for wives, death for adultery, death for seizing a woman from a comrade's tent, death for a man who forced a woman under protection. The crowd stayed quiet. The reader's voice did not shake. The words sounded old and polished by use. That same evening, envoys filed toward a large tent with painted pools. The felt walls held heat and the smell of resin. Tora Jean sat behind a screen. She wore white fur and a narrow expression. She listened, then waved business along. Gaiok stood to the side at first, then stepped forward when petitions touched the throne. I watched hands. I watched eyes. People measured their words. No one wasted air. One question could bruise an embassy. Genghis, a senior administrator, worked the room with a ledger. He mattered because he ran schedules and closed doors. He saw me and nodded. I saw another familiar face behind him. It was Tokal from the horse lines. She carried a small tray and watched me without moving her head. She mattered because the next part of my plan needed a witness who could move without notice. Exactly 3 months later, people would argue about whether my question had weight. Back to the tent. When my turn came, I stepped forward with Basil. I presented the Pope's letter. I gave the words of greeting required. Then I asked one question, plain and short. When war ends and your officers assign captives, what consent exists for a woman placed in a household? What protection covers her if she refuses a man? The tent thinned to silence. No one spoke for a count that felt long. Then Genghis answered first, calm and clear. He said the law punishes men who harm women under protection. He said captives become protected when assigned. He said refusal must pass through an official or an elder, not through flight or visible protest. He said the Yassa values order. Gaiok lifted a hand. The room stopped. He said the rule prevents quarrels and keeps blood inside the enemy's land, not inside the camp. He did not raise his voice. The scribes wrote. I asked a small follow-up. Who judges if an officer is the offender? Tora Jean spoke from behind the screen. She said a higher officer, a steward, or the Khan's court. She said a report must come through a responsible hand. She said false accusers die. She said true accusers gain protection. Her words cut clean. I heard two truths at once. A shield existed on paper. Fear closed many mouths before the shield could rise. A shield can hang too high to reach. They moved us along. My legs felt steady. My stomach did not. On the way out, Tokal drifted near my elbow. She said Urk worked in Dolan's dye shed and still slept under the promised roof. She said the King Guardian entry held. She handed me a scrap of yarn the color of walnut hulls. She said to show it to Dolan's woman if anyone questioned me. Urk still lived inside the bargain. That same evening, Alaka called for me. She sat with Kata and a Persian woman named Fatima. Fatima advised Tora Jean on accounts. She mattered because her hand rested near every seal in the regent's tent. Alaka asked why I had asked the consent question in a hall full of listening ears. I said I had sworn to carry such a question to the highest place, and this was the highest place I would reach. I kept my tone steady. I did not add heat. A hard answer still needs a calm face. Alaka said the regent valued truth spoken cleanly. Kata raised an eyebrow. Fatima asked what I wanted next. I said I wanted written guidance on guardian claims and assignments for captives after surrender. I wanted names of officers who could receive such claims. I did not show my pouch. I did not say Urk's name. Fatima held my eyes for a long breath. Then she said a list could be copied and sealed. She said I would get it after the enthronement. At dawn the next day, we watched the great ceremony begin. Drums staggered into a fast rhythm. Horses circled. Officials lifted standards. Gaiok moved to the center. The air tasted of smoke and cold fat. Envoys bowed when told. People around me murmured approval. The formal words named ancestors and victories. No one mentioned markets or carts. That was not the place. Ceremony hides the gears that keep turning. Back to the Envoys' quarter. Basil brought food, bread, and boiled meat, and told me we had done enough. He feared I had overreached. I told him I would ask nothing more inside the main tent. I would wait for the list. I asked him to check whether the clerk in Kata's office changed any entries after our talk. He went. He returned with a short line in his hand. The entry for girls taken at the last crossing now read, held for assignment by senior women. He said Alaka had done it. She had shifted power away from officers who drank too much. That was worth a line in my notes. Exactly a year earlier, I had believed that law either stood or failed. Here I saw it bend and still claim victory. I wanted to show that bend without losing my path out of the camp. That night, Tokal found me again. She said a writer from the West had brought a rumor that the new Khan would test envoys with a hard demand during the final audience. She would not say the demand. She said only that I should be ready to answer without looking to Basil. A test waited behind the next curtain. I slept in my coat. The ground felt hard through the felt pad. Every sound carried. I heard laughter, orders, whetstones, and carts. I woke before light and walked a small circle to steady my chest. When the drum started, I tasted metal. Basil stood ready. We stepped back into the current. The final audience would decide whether we left with seals and safe conduct or left our bones under foreign snow. Next, I will take you into that last audience, where a demand struck the room and a single choice pinned my exit and the fate of my sealed note. Back to the great tent for the final audience. The guards checked our belts. The smoke smelled of pine and fat. Drums thudded once, then stopped. We stood on packed earth that held the cold. The room waited for one hard word. Gayuk sat forward. Torajin stayed behind the screen. Chinkai held a board with cords. Fatima stood near a chest with seals. Kata and Alaka watched the door. Basil breathed slow. I counted my heartbeats to keep my voice steady. A herald read the demand. He spoke in a flat tone. The Pope and all Western rulers must come and submit. They must bring tribute. They must accept the law. The letter said that refusal meant war without mercy. The herald lifted the letter so all could see the cords. Then he held out a smaller strip. It carried the travel seal and the oath for envoys. The oath on the strip carried a trap. The oath said this: carry the great letter without change. Report only what the court approves. Keep no hidden lines that would harm Mongol honor. Basil's eyes flicked to mine. He knew about the small note in my pouch. He did not move his lips. He did not need to. Exactly a year earlier, in Lyon, the Pope told me to bring back truth and to keep my soul clean. Back to the tent. If I swore that oath is written, I would break my promise to the girl and to Tokal. If I refused, I would lose the seals that let us ride home. The guards would take our horses and our breath. Either path cut something I needed. I asked permission to speak to the wording. Chinkai nodded. I said I would swear to carry the great letter sealed and untouched. I said I would report what I saw and heard with care. I asked to add one phrase, according to the truth God allows my mouth to say. The room stilled. The phrase was small. It left me a door. Gayuk looked at Fatima. She weighed the air. She asked me, plain and without heat, if I meant to hide anything. I said I meant to protect the innocent from harm caused by my pen. I kept my eyes on hers. I did not blink. Torajin spoke from the screen. She said the law punishes men who twist words. She said the law also respects oaths sworn on God. She allowed the phrase. A small phrase changes a long road. They brought the wax. The clerk held out the strip. I pressed my ring. Basil pressed his. The herald tied cords around the great letter and fixed the travel seal. We had our exit if we did not stumble. Then the second part of the test came. That same evening, after the formal oath, a captain ordered a search of the envoys' things for forbidden charms or secret lists. He did it as routine. He did it to show the camp watched its own shadow. He told us to lay out our bags. We obeyed. Basil spread our blankets. I set the pouch down with the letter for the Pope inside. The small note sat in that pouch. I felt the weight of it with my palm. They looked for paper more than for steel. Alaka stepped in. She told the captain she would supervise. Her rank allowed it. She moved slow and exact. She opened boxes. She touched our books with 2 fingers. She kept her eyes level. Tokal passed the door with a tray and did not slow. The captain checked the hems of our coats. He tapped our boots. He found nothing he could name as a danger. Then he pointed to the pouch. Exactly 3 months earlier, back at the winter court, I had chosen silence to move a girl to safety. Back to the search. I opened the pouch. I held the great letter in both hands. I showed the wax. I set it back. Alaka reached for the second folded paper, the small one. She paused just long enough for me to read her thought. She did not pick it up. She looked at me. I looked at Tokal, who had just turned at the doorway as if she had forgotten a cup. One glance needed a whole plan behind it. I said calmly that the second fold was a prayer list for our dead. I asked permission to keep it in my sleeve during the search, so it would not fall in the dirt. The captain frowned. He did not like the request. Alaka said, "Let the friar keep his prayer list. He speaks to his God in the morning." The captain shrugged. He turned to Basil's chest. He poked the blanket. He found nothing. My sleeve felt heavy. The paper warmed against my skin. When the captain's back turned, I moved to the door to fetch water. Tokal stepped past me by 3 paces. Her hand came up for the tray. My hand went down as if I studied it. The fold slid. It vanished under the rim. No one spoke. No one breathed loud. Tokal walked on. The risky part ended in one small motion. The captain finished. He grunted. He told us to repack. He scraped his boot on the floor and left. Alaka stayed. She watched me tie the pouch shut. She said, in a low voice, that a list of officers who could receive guardianship claims waited in Khada's office. She said Fatima had sealed it. She said I could collect it in 1 hour. She set her palm on the pouch for a brief second. Then she walked away. At dawn the next day, we went for the list. Khada read the names out loud and handed the copy to Basil. It named stewards in major camps and 1 clerk at each winter station. It said where a woman could go to claim a guardian or ask for transfer to safer work. It was not a promise. It was a tool. I tucked it with the great letter. We bowed and stepped back. A tool on paper still needs hands. The final audience resumed at midday. The herald called us once more. Gayak gave the last lines. He said the West must submit or face ruin. He said we had leave to travel. He said we must move fast. He did not smile. The seal shone in the lamplight. The ground felt steady again. I kept my hands still. That same evening, Tokal found me by the horse lines. She gave me a scrap of cloth. The fold sat inside it, wrapped and dry. She said she could send it west with a caravan that left at dawn for the Urals. She asked if I trusted the trader. I asked who. She said his wife worked in Dolan's Daished. The wife had steady hands and a sister in the Rus quarter. The chain looked strong. I nodded. I told Tokal to send it. I told her to keep no copy. I told her to burn the scraps that hid it. The note left my hands before I slept. I walked back to the envoy fire. Basil pressed a piece of bread into my hand. He asked if we had done right. I said we had done what kept Urk safer for a little longer and kept our road open. I said the West would still hear the harsh demand. I said my comrades would still read between the lines. He did not argue. He said we leave at first light. Exactly a year earlier, I had thought duty meant one straight line. Here it split into narrow tracks. I had chosen the one that held more lives in balance. I had also placed trust in women who ran tents and lines while men spoke from chairs. You asked for horror. I have shown it in rules, in lists, in the cold voice of a herald. You asked how I carried it. I carried it by writing what I could in the report and slipping what I could not into a smaller fold. One question remains, did the fold survive? We packed in the dark. The horses stamped. The wind pushed ash along the ground. I touched the sealed letter of demand, the list of officers, and the passports. I did not touch the missing note. It wrote another road now. If it reached safe hands, it would speak with a smaller voice and a longer life. Next, I will close this journey. The ride out, the return to Lion, the letter read aloud, and the one line I'd kept for the end. Back to the road out. We left before dawn. The air cut our lungs. The horses blew steam. Guards at the last cord checked our seals and waved us through. I felt the weight of the great letter in my pouch and the lighter space where the small fold had once sat. The camp shrank, the oak did not. 2 days later, we crossed a narrow river on cracked ice. Our guide set a steady pace. Basil kept the passports dry under his coat. We slept in turns. We woke to hooves, not to bells. I spoke little. I listened for riders behind us. I heard only our own takrik. Silence can sound like pursuit. Exactly 3 weeks later, we reached a winter station near the pines. Kata's clerk stamped our papers and checked our loads. He mattered because a stamp there meant the road west stayed open. He pointed us toward a caravan that would skirt the worst drifts. We joined it at dusk. Men from the restlands drove wagons. A Turkic trader set the order of march. I kept my head down and my ring hand warm. That same evening, a woman stepped out from behind a cart. She wore a dark headcloth and carried a small bundle. She mattered because she ended my first open question. She whispered that the trader's wife from Dolan's dye shed had sent a package west 2 days earlier. It had passed to a sister in the Rust Quarter, then to this caravan. The woman pressed the bundle into my palm. Inside, wrapped in a strip of dyed cloth, lay the fold I had slipped from my sleeve. Dry, unopened. The line held, the paper lived. I did not celebrate. I checked the seal on the great letter again, then hid the small fold inside my shirt. I thanked the woman. I asked her name. She said Zoya and pointed to the wagons. She mattered no less than any lord. She vanished into the line. At dawn the next day, while the camp ate, a Kazakh rider came with a warning. Wolves had followed the caravan. We closed ranks and moved out. I kept the fold flat against my chest with my palm. Basil glanced at me and nodded once. We both knew the risk now lay more with men than with beasts, but we watched both. Teeth come on 4 legs and 2. 3 months later, after river ice turned to mud, we reached a trading post near the western edge of the steppe. Merchants swapped harness for grain. A priest from the rust towns, Father Mikhail, heard our Latin and brought us water. He mattered because he carried news and letters in both directions. He told us that some captives had moved west in chains and some in wagons. He had baptized 2 in a shelter by the river. He asked me if the laws we had heard matched what he had seen. I gave him the short answer. Inside the tents, order. Outside the tents, capture. Short answers still weigh a lot. Back to our line. We turned toward the Volga crossings and reached Batu's camp by the river. You remember Batu, a prince who ruled the west. He mattered because his guards held our path. We showed our seals. We offered the words the law required. Batu's stewards searched our bags with care, then waved us on. No one asked about the small fold. Alaka's steady hand still reached across distance in the form of clean paperwork and clear legends on cords. That same evening, near the horse lines, I saw a face I knew. Tokal stood with a bowl of mash. She had moved west with a string of remounts. She said Urk still worked in Dolan's dye shed. She said the King Guardian entry stayed in the ledger. She said Urk learned the walnut dye first and then onion skins. She did not promise a life beyond the year. She did not lie. I held my breath and let it go. A year is long in one life. We rode on. The border winds hit our faces. We crossed the Dniester in late spring. Traders spoke faster there. They asked about the enthronement. I gave bland lines, new Khan, strong guard, letters dispatched. I did not say more. I looked at the sky and counted the evenings to Lion. I touched the place on my chest where the fold lay and reminded myself to keep my head and my pace. Exactly a year earlier, the Pope had set a hand on my shoulder and told me to hold truth and soul together. Now I reached Lion with 2 documents in my pouch. The great letter smelled of smoke and felt heavy with cords. The small fold smelled faintly of walnut dye and felt light. I climbed the steps to the hall. A scribe unbarred the door. We entered. One room can feel like judgment. Back to the hall in Lion. Candles burned. Wax curled at the edges. The Pope sat with cardinals. The table held copies of maps. I handed the great letter to the master of the chamber. He cut the cords and spread the sheet. He read the demand aloud. Submit, bring tribute, accept the law, or face war. The room took the words in with still faces. Then the Pope looked at me. He asked, "What else?" I gave the report the embassy could bear. I spoke of camps, ranks, punishments, and oaths. I kept my tone flat. I spoke of supplies, horses, and the roads between rivers. I named the senior women who held keys and led Ordos. I did not speak the gift line in the way it had lived in winter. I used the cool wording that kept Urk under a roof this long. Truth can wear a formal coat. That same evening, in a side chamber, I asked for a small group. I named 2 cardinals who kept confidence and 1 notary with clean hands. I closed the door and unwrapped the dyed cloth. I laid the fold on the table. I read it aloud, my choice in the winter court, the terms with Alaka, the list of officers for guardianship claims, the proof of placement, the names Urk and Tokol. I asked them to keep the fold apart from the main report and to copy the list for quiet use by our contacts in the East. The small page finally spoke. The Pope entered at the end. He listened without moving. He asked me to repeat the part about consent and the law. I did. He asked me what I thought of my own choice. I said this: I chose 2 living women over a perfect report. He closed his eyes for one breath. Then he told the notary to seal the fold in a packet for limited hands. He told me to return to my brothers and to write the public text in measured words. He did not praise. He did not rebuke. Exactly 3 months later, I stood in a chapter house and read the formal report to our order. I left out the fold. I kept the lines tight. I named the danger to our lands. I warned that the demand allowed no delay. The brothers listened and prayed. One asked if the Mongols punished rape inside their camps. I said yes. He asked if that helped the women taken in war. I said not enough. Then I stopped. I had reached the end of what the public room could hold. Some truths need small rooms. Back to this last scene with you. You asked for horror. You looked for lurid acts behind a single name. I brought you into tents, oaths, and ledgers instead. You saw how a rule can punish a crime in one place and still live on the labor of people seized in another. You saw how a girl can arrive as a gift with a clerk's letter. You saw how a year's safety can hang on a quiet bargain and a line in a ledger. I will leave you with one question to carry. When law and order grow from conquest, where does justice start and who decides the first step? I cannot answer it cleanly. I can tell you what I did and what I wrote and what I hid. I chose 2 living women over a perfect report. If you want another road and another court, ask, and this old envoy will open a new page.